So hello everyone, it's wonderful to see you here for Earth Day. I was hoping for the sun, but as a friend of mine says, it is what it is, so we'll just have to do with it. So today is Earth Day, and one of the objectives of Earth Day is to help understand, to foster, to connect with our relationship with nature, and to help develop and strengthen that relationship. And for us, trees are very important, and for the ancient Irish, trees were very important. Today, trees are very useful. They're a great commodity, so we use them for fuel, construction material, paper. They're beautiful to look at. We use them for medicine, for food. So they've been a great utility for us today. But that relationship has not always been the same. In ancient Ireland and in many different parts in ancient cultures, people had a different relationship with trees, but not only with trees, with nature. They saw nature as something sacred, something conscious, something intelligent. And there was a different relationship with that. And today we've tended to forget about that relationship, or we've neglected it a little bit. And today we don't forage in the forests anymore, or on the land. We get our food for the supermarkets. And also the vision we have of nature or of life is a very materialistic. It's very reductionist. It's very, everything is matter. And nothing is alive or nothing is conscious. So it's a very different vision of life that is not helping this relationship we have. So in this talk, I'm trying to present another vision of reality, another vision of life, another vision of ourselves, another vision of nature that will help to, in my opinion, will help us overcome the challenges we're facing today in the environment. But not only in the environment, but in the world in general. But this vision I'm proposing or describing is a vision of union. A vision that sees life as interconnected, that sees life as multifaceted, but everything is interconnected, interdependent. So it's a very different vision. So we've lost, in general, this connection, this relationship with nature. But at the same time, when we leave the city, when we go into the forest, when we go into the woods, when we go into nature, the experience we have there is very different. The experience we have is an experience of connection. First with ourselves, and then with nature as well. So when we go into nature, somehow there's an experience of connectivity, relationship. Intuitively feel this, we may not understand why, but when we're there, we sense it. This idea is called animism. And animism explains that everything is alive, everything is conscious, everything is intelligent. And it's not the same level of consciousness we have as human beings, but it's a different level of consciousness. And today scientists are starting to discover this and realize this more and more. In the second talk that Yvonne is going to give, is going to be looking at what scientists have discovered about trees, what scientists have discovered about nature. That trees and nature is intelligent, it has a memory, it has a concern for its offspring, it warns, it protects. These are all qualities that suggest consciousness. So this ancient idea, ancient Irish idea, but that's not only Irish, it's a universal idea that everything's alive, is starting to re-emerge. And for me, it's very, very interesting. And sometimes in these discussions, it seems they place science and myths and symbols and folklore in opposition to each other. But folklore, myths and symbols, they were a different way of knowing, a different way of understanding, a different way of experiencing the world. When we say the word myth today, it's something false or untrue, but scholars have started to understand and discover that a myth, it means a sacred story or true story. but it may not be factually true, but symbolically true. And sometimes factually it's true as well. So in the talk, I'm going to look at Irish myths, the Irish symbols, Irish folklore that give us a new channel or a new way of comprehending and apprehending life. And in my opinion, we shouldn't place science and myth and symbols against each other, but they should be able to work together, to complement each other. Because science is more logos, it's more reason, where mythos is more, it's more trying to understand things in their interconnectivity, in the wholeness. The language of logos is this or that. Mythos is this and that at the same time. They're different logics, but they come together to complement each other. So that's really what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to set a little seed for this new vision, a metaphor. Trying to, hopefully sprouts will take place to help to see life in a different way. If you have any questions, stop me at any time and I'll try my best to answer them. So today in Ireland, well, if we look around the fields of Ireland, we'll see that there's not many trees here. And Ireland has, over the last few hundred years, has been the least populated country in Europe with trees, but that's changing over time. Now, over the last few decades, the Irish government and different organisations are starting to plant trees around Ireland. And it's been told that in ancient Ireland, if a squirrel could not walk, but go from a tree in Killarney to Cork without touching the ground. It was said that trees were so prevalent in Ireland that a squirrel could do that. Also, the word Gael, which means Irish or Ireland, it's an old Irish word for Ireland. Some scholars think it means forest people. So the Irish were also known as the forest people. So trees were very prevalent in the culture, and we're going to see this in their myths, their symbols. The trees meant a lot to the Irish, and they used them a lot to help understand things. And for them, trees were not only a source of utility, something that can be used, of course they can be used, but also they had great symbolic value, they had a great respect for trees, and there was a great relationship with trees as well. And so much so that in ancient Ireland, there were certain laws in place to protect trees. In the Breton laws, I'm sure some of you have heard those, there were certain laws in place that to protect trees. There was 4 different types, 4 different categories. There was the noble of the woods, the commoners of the woods, what was the third one? The lower of the woods and the bushes of the woods. And each of those had a different importance. The nobles of the woods were things like oak trees. If you cut an oak tree, you fell it and you took the wood, you'd have to pay a fine of 2 milk cows. That's a lot back then. That's their source of income. That was huge. So there was a great respect for trees back then. But as I was saying, that not only for utility, trees or groves were also a place of inauguration. They were a place for assembly when people came together to discuss things, to resolve the problems. So in Ireland today, we have Leinster House not far from here where Dáil Éireann meets. And that's an assembly place. But back in ancient Ireland, the places were specific groves, trees around Ireland that are very important, sacred spaces that were chosen. So they were of symbolic value. And that leads to kind of the first section of the talk. What is a symbol? What does it mean if something is symbolic? A symbol is something that represents something of a timeless nature. A symbol is a bridge to something universal, something timeless. It's something that helps us to connect with a principle of life, a value of life. And there's many different types of symbols that we have. One example is a symbol of a circle, because a circle has no beginning, no end, so it's timeless in nature. A symbol is something you see in nature all around you. You go outside, you'll see circles all around you. You look up in the sky, you'll see circles. So circle was something of a timeless, universal nature. Another example is a square. A square represents manifestation. It represents something that's made or constructed, naturally or man-made. So we're in a square at the moment, a kind of a square-type container at the moment. When you combine the square and a circle, it means something. That's an emblem. I don't have a whiteboard here, but if you take a circle and a square, you combine them together. Have you ever seen that image before, if you can imagine that? A square and a circle inside each other. Has anybody seen that?
Yes, I've seen it.
Pardon? Who?
Yeah, I've seen it.
And what art you've seen it in?
Leonardo da Vinci.
Yes, Leonardo da Vinci. Yeah. So that's a symbol. That means something. Symbolically, Leonardo was trying to explain something through his art. He was trying to represent something symbolic. The circle is something timeless, but the circle is in a square, something temporal. And the human being is in both dimensions at the same time. He's in the circle and he's in the square. And what he's trying to transmit to us, or help us understand, is that the human being has a timeless nature, the spirit, and a temporal nature, the body or the personality. And it's a bit of a paradox, one of the paradoxes of life, that we're timeless and temporal at the same time. And all that within that simple little symbol. So symbols help us a great deal to help us understand ourselves, help us understand life, help us understand the principles of nature, which rationality or reason has sometimes a hard time understanding. Black and white logic finds it very difficult to understand these concepts, these values, these ideas. That's why I said we need both. In Ireland, symbols, one of the symbols they used a lot to help explain these principles of life was the tree. Because the tree has rich symbolic value. Because the tree, the roots go into the ground, and the roots give sustenance, give energy, give stability to the tree. But they're hidden. You can't see the roots, but they're there. The trunk brings all those roots together and connects everything. And then there's different leaves, there's different branches, there's different expressions from those roots. So symbolically, sometimes what they've done is they've turned the tree upside down. And the roots of the trees comes from the invisible, something we can't see. They come from the invisible side of life. In ancient Ireland, it's called the she world, where the gods live. The Tuath Danann, the gods of Ireland, lived there. There's another place in Ireland called Tíorna Og. Have you heard of Tíorna Og? The place of youthfulness. You never die. You're always young. Time doesn't exist there. So it's a different dimension to life. So what the Irish are trying to explain to us, ancient Irish are trying to explain to us, life has another dimension. In mythology, they call it the other world. But at the same time, this other world is connected to the manifested world, the world around us, the here and now. But in the here and now, there's different expressions, there's different branches, there's different leaves. But they're all connected to the same roots. So it's a principle of life. It's a deep principle of life that the Irish are trying to explain to us. Well, not only the Irish, but many other different traditions. There's something timeless in this symbol. So this symbol of the tree, it's also represented as the cosmic tree, something universal. In ancient Irish, this sacred tree is called the Billa. So it's a special name for it because for them it was sacred. It represented the universe, it represented manifestation. In Norse mythology, they call it Yggdrasil. If any of you is watching the Thor movies or love all that sort of stuff, this will make perfect sense to you. But it means something. I know movies have taken all this stuff today and they've put it in movies to get money. But there's something in the symbols that we recognize, we connect with. We don't know why. To the level we understand. So the cosmic tree, it's something very large, but at the same time, the tree can represent the microcosm. Because in Greek mythology, Zeus created humanity from the ash tree. In one of the branches, he created humanity from the ash tree. In Irish mythology, they say that the human being came from Adler, tree Adler. So it came from a tree. So what it's trying to explain symbolically, and literally, we don't understand this literally, but symbolically explains that everything is interconnected. There's something coming from the invisible, nourishing the manifested world, and we're just an interconnectivity between everything in life. Also, they describe trees with people with certain qualities of trees. You know, sometimes they call people as strong as an oak. Sometimes we use that. I'm sure in different traditions, in Brazilian or Italian or different nationalities, they have different expressions. So trees symbolically represent many different things and help us understand aspects of life that the rational logos mind has a very difficult time to understand. But symbols are one aspect of knowing. There's another one that's very popular today, and it's called mythology. And when I mentioned the word myth, a myth is usually, if you ask someone in the street, I went out in the street now and asked someone, what's a myth? They say, it's only a false story, it's only a silly story. But the word myth means a sacred story, a true story. But it's a story that's not factually true. It's a story that's symbolically true. A story that represents something in life. And these myths were transmitted orally from one generation to the next because they contained a great deal of knowledge, a great deal of information, a great deal of teachings, but they used the vehicle of the story to help pass it on. And why did they use the story? Because we love telling stories. We love telling stories of what happened yesterday, what's going to happen tomorrow, what could happen. Stories are fantastic vehicles, poetry. The Irish were known to be great poets and scholars. So stories were a great vehicle. And myths were very important. But what has happened is we've lost the ability to read the myth, to read the story. And now we're only starting to rediscover it. Scholars like Mircea Eliade, Joseph Campbell, Carl Jung, many others have deciphered these stories, the myths, and helped us understand them. So myths were used as a vehicle in Ireland to help pass on teachings, to help give perspective, to help give understanding. So you can talk all day about Irish myths. You can spend a whole course talking about Irish mythology. I'll just mention one about Finn McCool, one of the Irish heroes. Another one is Cuchulainn. But Finn, one day he was asked by one of his teachers to cook a salmon for him. And this was no ordinary salmon. It was a salmon that had eaten the hazelnuts of one of the trees of knowledge or wisdom around a well. And he very carefully followed the instructions, but he noticed when he was cooking the salmon, a blister was arising from the salmon. He didn't want to destroy the look of the salmon, so he touched the blister, but then he burnt his finger and he put it into his mouth, so he tasted salmon. And there he gained in wisdom, in knowledge. It's a story the theme of the story is very ancient. It's like the Buddha who went to Siddhartha Gautama in ancient India, who's through his own personal development, through his own inner efforts, he reached a state of enlightenment called nirvana, state of nirvana, under the fig tree. So when he reached under the fig tree, he reached enlightenment, a state of consciousness. It's called nirvana. That tree was called the Buddha tree afterwards. But the stories are very similar. They're using symbolism to explain that there's a state of consciousness within the human being that we haven't awakened to yet. We have it, it's some potential, but there's a certain methodology, there's a certain way of going to it. So all these stories about myths, about trees, about hazelnuts, they're rich in symbolism, they're rich in knowledge and understanding. There was something else when I was researching for this talk. I was reading the author Moncon McGann. I don't know if you've heard of him. His book, Listening to the Land Speak. He's a very good author because he helps to bring Irish myths back to life again. He's a few chapters about trees. And what he explains, and what I've read before, is that was very important was to connect the myths to the land, to connect the myths to nature. Because when we walk through the fields, when we walk through nature, when we go through, everything reminds us of a story. Everything reminds us of a teaching. Everything has a meaning, but it's in the landscape. It's all around us. So when we go to a special place, Tara, when we go to any place around Ireland, there was also a myth associated with it. These stories and myths were written down in texts called the Dunshanicas, which means the sacred place names. And the people recorded them, and there was oral traditions. No matter where you went in Ireland, everything had a meaning. Everything was interconnected. A field was just not a field. A tree was not just a tree. Everything was interconnected, and people knew why. And the last thing, another aspect I want to talk about is folklore. And folklore, well, folk means, you hear the Americans talk a lot about folks, means a community, about people. Lore is learning, knowledge. So it's the knowledge of the community. It's the knowledge of people who have grown up in an area and have passed on this customs, belief, understanding from one generation to the next. So folklore is knowledge that has been passed on through down the ages. Today, when we mention the word folklore, it's a bit like myth. It's a bit superstition. It's a bit silly. When I started to research this more, I started to understand a little bit that there was a reason why all these stories were transmitted. Perhaps we don't understand now why these folklores was told in a certain way or what they mean, but we've forgotten what they mean. Well, I'll give a few examples to help understand a little bit. So one that I grew up with, when I was a little boy in County Monaghan, I used to walk around the fields, this is in the north of Ireland, and there was these fields that had a tree in the middle of them. And I could never understand why was a field got just a tree in the middle of it, just looked out of place. So I used to go back to my father and ask him, what is this about? Why is there a tree in the middle of a field? And he explained to me that this was a fairy tree. And this tree had a special significance, a special place in the countryside. It was supposed to be where spirits of nature lived. And that farmers out of respect and out of fear and wouldn't touch this tree because they're afraid what would happen if they cut it down. And, you know, back then a little boy, I'd be looking at my father going, what are you talking about? Spirits of nature and fairies. It's only later when I read a little bit more, discovered things what scientists are saying that nature has a certain spirit to it, that it's not all dead matter. The talk that Ivana's going to give, what scientists said about trees blew my mind. Intuitively, I understood, but my scientific side, when I heard this, I couldn't. It's just like, wow, what trees do. And there is an intelligence in trees. There's also an intelligence in plants. There's also intelligence in all the nature around me. Some scientists did studies with plants. They connected electrodes up to plants. And when someone gets angry, the plant reacts in a certain way with a certain current. When they play beautiful music, it reacts a different way. The studies are not conclusive, but it suggests that plants react some way to humans. It's not conclusive. It's suggestive. There's something else than we realize. So if the stories about the fairies are true or not, I don't know. But there is something more than meets the eye in folklore and myth. And I think we're starting to rediscover this in our culture, in our world today. Also, when I was reading the book Mon Con McGann, he was saying that he went up to Donegal, and one of the people there was saying that the people would tell children not to go near rivers because the fairies are going to get them. And he was explaining that was a purpose why they told them that stories, because back then river edges were very dangerous. If a child went near a river edge, they could be swept into the river and killed. So there was also a reason, a warning, to help kids keep away from the river. Later on, they understood, okay, that's the story. But you have to understand the language a little bit, the symbol. So, another thing about folklore is, trees had a part to play in our relationships with one another. So, if you really like someone, and you wanted to enter into a relationship, a romantic relationship with that person, you would take a twig off a birch tree and you would give it to them. And that would be a symbol, a symbolic token to say something, I care for you and I want to be with you. What do we do today if we love someone and we want to give them a token of love? What do we do?
Swipe right.
Pardon? What do we do? No. What do we do? Flowers, exactly. Thank you. I thought someone was going to say give them an iPhone or something. Flowers, yes, we give them flowers. The sentiment is the same. It's a birch tree, it's a flower. Different times, but the sentiment is the same. The alder tree was associated with war, because when they dug up shields in ancient Ireland, they discovered most of the shields were made from alder. And something about alder is when you cut it down, the tree bark or the tree turns from white, the trunk changed from white to red. So I thought that was very interesting. So there was another about yew trees. Yew trees are normally planted around burial grounds, cemeteries. And you can kind of wonder, why yew trees? Why just not an oak tree? Why a different type of tree? Well, yew trees turned out to be quite poisonous. They're poisonous to animals. And in Ireland today, every few years, you hear reports in the newspaper that cattle or sheep or goats went in, ate yew leaves and died. So there was a reason why certain trees were in certain places and other trees were in other places. There's a meaning, there's a purpose behind it. So, what can I say in summary? It's a short talk about trees. It's a short talk about this topic. There's lots that could be said, there's lots we can discuss. And I mentioned at the beginning of the talk that the vision we have of life is very important. The vision we have inherited is very important. Over the last few hundred years, with the emergence of the Enlightenment, we've started to see things or understand things in a very materialistic way, in a very mechanical way. And there's reasons behind this. And this methodology has been very useful and productive and very helpful in helping us to understand the world, understand ourselves. We have great technology, great medicine, great tools, but it's limited in another way. It's very limited in another way because it disconnects us from consciousness. Science have a very difficult time trying to understand what consciousness is, because how can you get something conscious from something just mechanical and material? It's a mystery to science at the moment. So what the myths, symbols, folklore, these ancient stories are trying to do is trying to widen our perspective, widen our vision, helping us to understand ourselves, others, and nature, trees in a very, very different way. It's a different logic, it's a different way. And the value that underlies or encompasses this vision is a quality of union. Because our world today tends to be very fragmented. It's like my branch of the tree is better than your branch. I can only see life in one branch, but I can't see all the branches. The vision I'm trying to propose is a vision where we're able to see and to help us connect all the different branches together. Because the environmental challenges we're facing today are a consequence of this lack of union, this lack of vision we have as a collectivity. Great technology, but at a human level, we find it very difficult to resolve our conflicts and define a common good together. And I think this vision and these qualities can help unite us. Do you have any questions? Any comments?
Would you say that May Day and the Celtic festivals are very tied in with Earth Day as well? They almost occur the same day, May Day and Earth Day.
I don't know if they were chosen for the same time. I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know if they did that for a certain reason. I haven't heard that or read that. Yeah.
You mentioned that we've lost all our trees. We've been down to 1%. We're now at 11. But unfortunately, it's all coniferous trees. And I have a strong view on this, that there should be deciduous oaks. There's much more spirituality in nature than coniferous forests. Any comment?
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. Our native woodlands are very limited. We have a lot of coniferous trees that are not good for the soil, not good for biodiversity. I think there is initiatives underway within the government for grants and different schemes. I think there's a new scheme coming out this year of trying to encourage farmers and different individuals to plant native trees, native woodlands, and have a diversity of trees. Not only one tree, but trying to create a diversity that helps to create, diversity creates a biodiversity. I think that's really, really important. And I think the governments are taking steps to do that. Again, this idea of union, because you have many different types of trees working together as a network, as a biosphere, to help create something healthy and sustainable. I don't know if that helps you. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so your birch tree, the gift of love.
Yes.
But is it not the love of learning, the discipline of knowledge, the Ogham alphabet, letters beginning B, L, F, N, S, B for beta, which is birch. So as they try and get this knowledge right, you have this cosmic tree, universal Billa Yagdrazul, which is sort of a Genesis story of the Druidic lore. How does that differ from a Genesis story of the Bible? And is there a comparison that you have for it?
God. God, how do I answer that? So, there is, it's deep. That's a long answer. It's a long answer for that. But in Genesis, it's a myth as well. There are trees in Genesis as well, the tree of good and evil, the tree of knowledge. Both are going back to something universal and timeless. To use different language, to use different images to describe that. They're the same but different at the same time. And
how different and where is it? And do you have the lore?
I think we have only a few minutes to wrap up. But when you look at mythology all around the world, you're going to see something very interesting. You're going to see commonality and you're going to see difference at the same time. You're going to see underlying themes that are similar, but they're going to use different symbols and language, and they have a different emphasis on things. So in Ireland, they're very connected to nature. They're very connected with trees. So we look at Irish mythology and the Celtic mythology, they're very much connected to the land and nature. Where in other mythologies, they use more the hunt to connect with things. In some mythologies, they're in the desert, so they use the symbols of the desert, like in ancient Egypt and the Nile, to explain these ideas. So they use the land they have around them to explain something timeless. So that's when you're trying to read this language, you're trying to understand it, you have to understand this approach. So that's a short answer to a very long. Yes.
So you mentioned at the start of the talk that we're coming back to this idea of interconnectivity and understanding consciousness. That that all things have consciousness. We're coming back to it. And have you any thoughts on why that is? Is it because it's now so fragile that we're kind of at the point of going, we need to do something before it's all gone, or is it Is there something driving that, do you think?
I think what brought us here is, well, it's a long historical journey who brought us here. I think we went from one extreme to the other. In the Middle Ages, we went to the search for God, but we've neglected the material world. So we went from one extreme to the other. And now we're going from the other extreme, we're going to the material world, and we're getting away from the spirit. So we've created an extreme, an excess, a division. And what I was playing at the beginning of the talk is to not to create these separations, but to create a complementarity, a union between different facets of life. Because as I mentioned with the circle and the square, we have the spirit, which is a circle, but we also have the manifestation, the square, the matter. So today we've gone a lot into matter to understand the physical world around us, and we've done a fantastic job at that, to understand with our technology, with our science, fantastic progress. But at the same time, we went to an excess. And excesses in general are not good. Going to an excess or extremes are not good. We talk about balance or to have a golden mean. So now I think we've gone to such an extreme that we realize, okay, when we go to an extreme, there's consequences. There's an imbalance. The imbalances are created in the environment, but this imbalance is created with pollution. This imbalance is created at social level. Imbalances in many different facets of life. It's not only the environment, there's many human dimensions that are out of balance. And what helps us bring back this balance is trying to connect back to the root of things, to connect back to the ideals, to connect back to the essence, to connect back to the teachings, universal teachings that helps to give us a certain perspective, a vision, an ideal, something to aim for, that helps us to reconnect. In the ancient Irish would say to go back to the roots, to go back to the essence. We talk a lot about justice, beauty, harmony, compassion. These are all ideals and values that we all aspire to. So helping go back to those, to reconnect with that, to give a vision of life that helps us reconnect with that, that will help bring balance and harmony between the three different divisions in life. I hope that helps.
When I was growing up, Michael, we said that an apple a day keeps the doctor away. And if you cut the apple in half, there's the five-pointed star.
Yes.
There. Have you anything on that, on the orchard in Ireland?
I don't know. I don't know. I've never noticed it. I should have noticed it, but no.
No, I came across
Yeah.
it 20 or 30 years ago. I was over in England at a New Age festival.
Yeah.
And it's just coming to mind now.
Yeah. The thing it reminds me of is in nature. We talked about this, I think, one of our magazines. We published our little internal magazine recently. We're talking about art, and in nature, there's sacred geometry in nature with the Fibonacci series. We see in nature this universal geometric patterns that emerge a lot in nature, and they represent a principle of life. And you see this in flowers, the way trees grow. Trees grow in a certain way, so there's balance, there's not extremes. So that's the only thing that comes to mind. So.
We got a lot of butterfly bushes,
Mm.
and they're growing up very high, and we didn't plant them at all.
Yeah, okay.
Just wondered, would it be the birds?
I have no idea, sorry. Don't know. Yes?
You've talked very well about the world around us. I'm just wondering, in today's world, mankind's impact has been enormous on the planet. We all live in cities and we all have our smartphones. How do we reconnect a love of nature? Because without nature, we are up the creek with climate change, the way things are going. How do we get the spirituality? We talked about, we went to materialism. How do we get back to appreciating nature in all its glory and what it does for us?
So I think the one of the things we can all do here is it's to foster a love for nature, to fall in love with nature. Because intellectually, I think we all understand what we talked about quite well. I mean, this makes perfect intellectual sense. But I mean, to take that understanding, that vision, that inspiration, we have to open our heart to make a change and to want to do it. Because the difference between loving something and liking something, when we like something, well, we do it when it's comfortable or when it's convenient. You know, I like something. But when we love something, it's a different energy. It's a different drive. When you love someone, you'll go to the end of the world for that person. When you love an ideal, when you love a value, you'll live and work towards being that. When you love nature, well, you'll find a way to help nature. Nature has an intrinsic value. We don't give nature a value. I think that's something very important, because nature in itself has a value, and we can. I think we have a responsibility as human beings to help nature in its growth, in its evolution, in its development. We're not there just because it's a benefit to us, because we want cleaner water. Yes, we do want cleaner water, but it's to understand that relationship I mentioned. It's very important, this relationship, this idea of relationship, of harmony. The Chinese call it working with the Tao, working with the principles of life, the laws of life. When we don't understand the laws of life, the principle of life, the balance of life, well, what happens is, inadvertently, we break the balance. Then we go to an extreme, as I mentioned. We go to an excess. When we don't understand our body very well, we tend to go to an excess. And when we go to an excess, what does that look like? How do we feel? Sickness or pain.
It's absolutely great.
We get pain, we get sickness. And in the world, when the world gets sick, well, that looks different. It looks like pollution and whatever, so on and so forth. So that's one of my answers, is to have to fall in love. We have to fall in love again. Philosophy means love of wisdom, to fall in love with wisdom, to fall in love with something we don't have yet, but we have the potential to gain it and to live it and to be wise. So it's to be wise in entering with nature, in that relationship with nature. Thank you very much.